In 1969, you could legally carry a $10,000 bill in your wallet. Today, if you tried to spend one at a store, most cashiers wouldn't even recognize it as real money. They'd probably think it was fake or call the police. But these bills weren't rare curiosities or props. They were official U.S. currency, printed by the government with real historical figures on them. So what happened? Why did America print money bigger than anything we use today? And why did it just vanish? Here's the part that surprises most people. America didn't just print one large bill. It printed five denominations bigger than $100. $500, $1,000, $5,000, $10,000, and even a $100,000 bill. The $500 bill had Chief Justice John Marshall on early versions, later replaced by President William McKinley. The $1,000 bill featured Alexander Hamilton before he became famous again on the $10 bill. The $5,000 bill had President James Madison. And the $10,000 bill, that one had Salmon P. Chase, a Treasury Secretary most Americans today couldn't name if their life depended on it. The $100,000 bill was the strangest of all. It had President Woodrow Wilson on it, and it was gold-colored. But you were never legally allowed to hold one. It never left the Federal Reserve System. It existed purely to move money between banks. To understand why these bills existed at all, you have to picture a financial system with no computers, no wire transfers, and no instant transactions. If one bank needed to send a massive sum of money to another bank, say to settle accounts at the end of the day, they had two choices. Either physically ship crates full of small bills, which was slow and risky, or move one giant bill that represented the same value in a single compact piece of paper. So these large denominations were created almost entirely as a tool for banks and the government, not for the average citizen. A wealthy businessman might occasionally carry a $500 or $1,000 note for a large purchase, or to avoid carrying a stack of smaller bills. But the $5,000 and $10,000 notes almost never touched a regular person's hands. They lived in bank vaults, moving quietly and rarely between institutions, doing a job that had nothing to do with everyday commerce. Then the entire financial world shifted underneath them. Through the early and mid-1900s, banks increasingly adopted checks and eventually electronic wire transfers. Suddenly, a bank didn't need to physically move a giant bill across the country to settle a transaction. It could just send numbers over a telegraph line and later a computer network. The exact function these bills were built for, solving the physical logistics problem of moving huge sums of money, simply stopped being a problem. By the 1960s, wire transfers had fully replaced the need for the $5,000 and $10,000 notes. The $500 and $1,000 bills held on a little longer, since they still saw occasional legitimate use by businesses and wealthy individuals, but even they were becoming rare in day-to-day commerce. These bills weren't being spent anymore. They were just sitting in vaults, aging. On July 14, 1969, the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve, under President Nixon's administration, made it official. All denominations above $100 would be discontinued immediately. Officially, the reasoning was simple: lack of use. But there was a second, less publicized reason that mattered just as much: concern over organized crime. A single $10,000 bill lets someone move an enormous amount of wealth in a single pocket, with no paper trail and no need to explain a suitcase full of smaller bills. For criminal enterprises, tax evaders, and anyone moving large sums outside the law, these bills were nearly perfect. The government was in the middle of an aggressive push against organized crime in this era, and cutting off easy, untraceable, large-scale cash movement was part of that strategy. So this wasn't only a housekeeping decision about outdated currency. It was also a deliberate move to make life harder for criminal operations that depended on moving large amounts of physical cash discreetly. From that day forward, banks were instructed that any of these large bills they received had to be sent to the Treasury for destruction, not put back into circulation. Here's the detail almost nobody knows. These bills never actually became illegal. Technically, every single one is still legal tender today. If you found a genuine $10,000 bill in an old drawer, you could, in theory, walk into a bank and deposit it at full face value. But almost nobody would ever do that, because these bills are worth dramatically more to collectors than their printed value. A surviving $10,000 bill has sold at auction for well over $100,000. A $5,000 bill has fetched as much as $300,000 in top condition. Even a worn, heavily circulated $500 bill is worth several times its printed value to currency dealers today. Because banks have been required since 1969 to send any of these bills they receive straight to the Treasury for destruction, the supply still in existence keeps shrinking every year, which is a huge part of why the surviving examples have become so valuable. Ironically, the very obscurity these bills were designed to end is now exactly what makes them worth a fortune. And then there's the strangest one of all, the $100,000 gold certificate featuring Woodrow Wilson. Unlike every other large bill on this list, this one was never meant to circulate publicly, even among banks doing business with each other. It existed purely as an internal accounting tool, moving between Federal Reserve banks to settle enormous balances. It was never issued to the public, never available to businesses, and never legal for a private citizen to own. If one had somehow ended up in your hands in 1934, possessing it could have gotten you into serious legal trouble. Even today, the handful that survive are property of institutions, not collectors, making it the one denomination in this story that was never really money in any sense a normal person could touch. So the next time a movie shows a briefcase stuffed with giant bills, know this. It wasn't Hollywood exaggeration, it really happened. For decades, America's financial system quietly ran on bills bigger than most people's monthly paycheck today, moving unseen between banks and vaults, until wire transfers and a war on organized crime made them obsolete almost overnight. A small number are still out there, in vaults, in collections, maybe even in someone's attic waiting to be discovered as a piece of financial history worth far more than the number printed on it. If you liked learning the hidden history behind money you thought you already understood, subscribe. This is exactly the kind of story we dig up every week.